A little bit of a visitor last night. For us, the raccoon was going and eating Thunderbolt's food. He was also killing some of the hens, but the hens were kind of just free ranging throughout the property. So there wasn't any really good way to pinpoint where he's at. And what we're kind of looking for is like a choke point. I knew he was going up through the windows because I could see the marks, I could see his dirty little paw prints, some scratching, some smudging of dirt on one of the totes up there. So I knew I was gonna set my trap up there. You're gonna have the most success if you need to trap something by putting basically the trap where the raccoon is going, right? Location, location, location. Remember that. Go where the raccoon's already going. If the raccoons are going to your chicken coop, get trap in the chicken coop. Now for bait with raccoons, usually whatever they're eating on is a great bait because they're already going for it anyway. Usually I'll stack the deck and use a bunch of marshmallows. Just one, because not much else will eat marshmallows. Visually they're very appealing. If they get a couple in their mouth, they're delicious. And I can actually use the marshmallow to squirt inside some lure, usually something fruity based. I get a whole bucket of lures. I've got a wildlife control business as well, so I have lots of lures kicking around. But anything really fruity, you could probably use gummy bears. But commercial lures have a lot of aroma to them and a lot of flavors that appeal to raccoons. And they're generally not very picky. They tend to be pretty opportunistic, kind of like bears. So if they're already going someplace anyway, say like into your chicken coop, and you have a trap set up in the door of your chicken coop where they're gonna go anyway, having bait, marshmallows, sweet things in there is just gonna help seal the deal a little more. You know, it's just gonna up that ante where they're gonna wanna go check it out. So that's what I generally go with. Another thing, I generally use the 10 by 12 by 30 inch Safeguard one single door cage trap. It's a super universal trap. You can use it for groundhogs, you can use it for raccoons. Sometimes we'll stick Thunderbolt inside it when we need to take them to the vet. You could put a couple chickens in it, and if you had to, you can catch rats in it. Usually when that happens for me, it's more opportunistic than anything. But the size of the holes are designed such that a rat can't quite slip through. It probably could if it tried hard enough technically, but it's pretty tight. Now one thing about going with a higher quality trap over like your Tractor Supply junk is the thickness of the wire. Especially when it comes to raccoons, raccoons can really hurt themselves. Now, on the Safeguard, the front half of the trap has pretty good size holes to it. I think they're like an inch, inch and a half by inch and a half, something along those lines. Pretty good size. You can definitely get your thumb through there. It's a pretty good size hole. But as you get to the back of the trap, they actually use a tighter weave. You know, I can really barely get my finger down inside it. And that's good, because in that area where the raccoon is, if they have the opportunity, they will stick their arm through those holes of the cage trap trying to grab at things, and then they're gonna be doing a bunch of damage to their arms, you know, and that's really kind of shitty. Whether you're relocating, which there's a lot of issues with the relocation, or you're gonna kill them, that's one thing, but they shouldn't have to endure undue suffering in the meantime. Plus, when they reach out, they can grab all kinds of stuff, you know, so if there's anything they get a hold of, they're gonna be just destroying it, right? Any wood, any feed bags, any shirts, like whatever, they're gonna make a mess of it. So it's better to keep them contained. Not only that, when you're picking up the cage and you're walking along, you don't need raccoons reaching out trying to grab you. Just a safety issue, right? So buy a better trap. Tomahawk, Safeguard are good. Wildlife Control Supplies has some great traps. Try to avoid those junk, flimsy Tractor Supply, hardware store type models. The Have-A-Hearts, a lot of times the Have-A-Hearts have some really junk trigger mechanisms. They're designed for homeowners, but they're mostly garbage, mostly the trigger mechanisms. Safeguard's one of my favorites, primarily because the trigger mechanism is super simple, it's highly dependable, it's rugged, and the price is about perfect. It's about in the middle of where you go at. There are higher ends, like the Tomahawks are really nice, but you do go up in price, and if you're not using them day in and day out, it may not be cost effective, or you may not see any benefit to having that higher level unless you plan on buying a trap once and then having it forever. And if you're gonna be farming for a while, or a homeowner, and you're gonna be potentially trapping animals over time, porcupines, squirrels, anything, you want something that's gonna last. The last thing I do is I always wrap all my traps. A lot of times I'll just use some feed bags old chicken feed bags. It doesn't really matter. I use the old plastic feed bags mostly because when they get wet, they don't break down. They're cheap and readily available. They keep the sun off, they keep the rain off, especially if you're gonna be setting your traps out and then checking in the morning, or maybe you get a little delay in the morning, you haven't checked in for a little bit till mid-morning. It gives the animals some protection from the elements, you know, a little bit keeping wind off them, rain off them, some sun off them. It gives them a little protection. They feel like they're in a little cubby, which sometimes that can increase their acceptance of the trap because it feels safe, so they're gonna wanna go in and investigate. And they're disposable. If you get a raccoon, it's gonna tear it apart. They're just gonna destroy it, and that's okay. I just use a piece of 550 cord, wrap it around twice. When the raccoon's destroyed it, I just take it off, throw it away, put on a new one, good to go. It can sit in the bar until I need it next. The only downside I have with the plastic is that if they're outside for any length of time, the UV rays from the sun will break them down. They'll start to disintegrate like an old tarp. If I see that happening, I just crumple them up and throw them away, because if not, you'll have little bits of plastic all over the place, and it's absurd. But as a way to stretch those plastic chicken bags just a little farther, real cheaply and easily, that's the way that I go. So when you've got to dispatch them, just standard 22 long range, you know, aim right between the eyes, maybe a little bit up, just a little bit right into their head. And the nice thing about the Safeguard is the opening side where those big squares are generally just big enough so you can put the barrel of your gun in there. All right, so you can lay it in there, you can take your time. When the raccoon's got exactly lined up, then you can pull the trigger, lights out, show's over, right? You can move on with your life. Now, for us, I compost almost everything. Probably 90% of all the compost we make goes towards fields or perennial plants, like mulching our apple trees and that type of thing. Sometimes we'll put in pumpkins, that kind of stuff, we'll plant them. But we don't actually have a lot of gardens where we're doing like carrots and root vegetables and that kind of stuff. And even still, I'm not concerned about any pathogens, because for us, we will bury any type of nitrogen matter that we have, including our dead animals, into a massive pile of wood chips. I actually want a higher proportion of carbon, wood, chips, sawdust, bark, leaves, any of that stuff, to our wet matter, like our raccoon manure, old veggies, that kind of stuff, grass, any of that green stuff. That's, you know, that's your nitrogen source. And what you're trying to do is just you're basically trying to counteract that and provide enough carbon so that the nitrogen that's in the soil can actually bond together and bind to become basically a stable matrix of nitrogen in the soil, something that isn't just going to wash away or volatilize. If you go to some place and you start smelling something that smells like a dead animal or manure, that's the nitrogen that's inside that soil being volatilized to the atmosphere. To counteract that, lots of nitrogen. Cornell University actually has a series of bulletins you can go check out, and I'll put them in the links below, on how to compost roadkill, how to compost slaughter waste. I think they did one on how to compost a right whale. You know, anything can be composted. I could release this raccoon, but there's a whole bunch of issues with relocation. I could have eaten this raccoon, but honestly our freezer's full, and I'm not set up right now to mess around with it. So we're killing it, and we're gonna compost it, and eventually that raccoon is gonna break down, it's gonna feed our soil, and eventually that soil is gonna go back to feeding our plants and the soils around our plants that are then gonna come back and feed us, and that cycle continues. So it is one of the best ways to dispose of animals and waste in general. Burying is not a great option because they're just gonna slowly decay in primarily an anaerobic environment, and then they have the potential of leaching all that gunk into your groundwater, depending on the volume of species and the soil condition. There's some other factors that go into it, but generally speaking, it's often better to compost waste rather than bury them, all right? So that's the way that we go on our farm. So that's it, guys. If you have any more questions, or you're having issues with wildlife or predation on your farm, let me know. I'll help you out whatever I can. And I'll put links to all the traps and all the things that I recommend, things that I like that have been very successful for me, not just on the farm, but in my off-farm work as a wildlife control officer. I do a lot of trapping and a lot of wildlife removal on homes and businesses and farms. So I've seen this stuff a lot. So I'll lend whatever advice I can to help you guys out, and wish you all the best. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.